Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. My name is Morgue. I'm an ex-Christian revealing hidden knowledge to create a new world and a new consciousness. And today we're cracking the code of the Emerald Tablet. Now, this is a very important video. We are going to be learning the elements of alchemy, the four elements, the three primes, the two principles, the one thing and the one mind, to understand and crack the code of the Emerald Tablet and discover what it really means. Now, there's so much that I wanted to put into this video because there's so much interesting information that I had to cut out a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk to you guys about today. But this is very important. And so what we're talking about is alchemy. And the reason why, I want to give you a rundown on why we're talking about this. And this diagram will be important later. So you don't have to worry about it right now. I'm just going to kind of have it up here in the background. Because this will ultimately be sort of the key to understanding and unlocking this information. But don't worry about it too much right now. I'll explain as we go along. Now, what we are talking about, why is this important? There's a couple different reasons why that this is important. First of all, this is about transforming the self, transforming the soul, and transforming consciousness. True alchemy is inner alchemy. It's spiritual alchemy. It's about transforming the self, not about transforming metal into gold. That's an allegory. That's a symbolism for the transformation of the soul. I did a previous video on that if you want to know more about that and the history of it. Also, understanding this is going to be key to when we talk about more advanced topics like magic, tarot, and Kabbalah. If you understand the basics of alchemy, you'll be able to understand those systems much, much easier. So this is kind of a nice master key or cheat code to understand these other systems much easier if you have this base foundation. Now, I want to remind you again as to why we're even doing this. What does this matter? Who cares? And I think the people that will have the most difficulty understanding why we're doing this are those who think about things very logically and rationally. And I understand because I think about things very logically and rationally. So if that's you, you might be thinking, who cares about alchemy? Isn't that old and outdated? We have a much more advanced ways of understanding reality these days. Who cares about alchemy? And in a strict sense, you are right, but we have to understand that we're not approaching alchemy from that angle. Learning alchemy is not about gathering data or learning facts. So what is it actually about? It's about creating a symbolic code to communicate with your unconscious mind. So this isn't about acquiring factual data. It's about forging a bridge, a link between your conscious mind and your unconscious mind, because your unconscious does not communicate in words. Your unconscious communicates in symbols. Like when you go to sleep and dream, your dreams are highly symbolic. They're constructed from your unconscious mind. So by integrating certain symbols into your conscious mind, you can use this to communicate with your unconscious and become much more unified and whole as your unconscious and conscious begin working together. So I just want to stress that learning about this stuff isn't about gathering data. It's something completely different. It's about engaging in the intuitive connection to your unconscious to create that system of symbolism to actually make that connection and reach higher levels of consciousness from this particular angle. Okay. So let's see. I want to remind you that I have alchemical notes for those who are members. If you're a member on Patreon or a member on YouTube, I'm releasing my notes on these alchemical videos that I'm doing. I released the last one on the previous video. That one is already out. I'll be doing one on this video and subsequent videos. And I highly recommend it because it's hard to find good information on alchemy. So I'm putting together these notes as something that I would have loved to have had when I was learning alchemy in a very simple, easy to understand, concise way that really gets to the heart of things. Because what you'll find when you're trying to learn alchemy, you'll either find really academic stuff or really esoteric stuff. The academic stuff can be a little dry and the esoteric stuff can be interesting, but very confusing and misleading and full of factual errors. It can be hard to wade through that. So anyway, I highly recommend that. It helps out the channel when you become a member as well. So that's great. Reminder that my books are available. Check out my books. The links are in the comments. If you're wondering, I have 5 books out. If you're wondering which one to go with, 2 options: either go with book number 1, or you could skip all the way to the last book, book number 5, because this is going to relate to alchemy very much. In here is inner star actualization, hyper awareness, and will forming, how to transform yourself, transform reality, and manifest your will into existence. This is very, and later on, I will be not in this video, but in subsequent videos, I will be showing exactly how alchemy relates to psychogenesis and interstar actualization, the topics in this book. Okay, so those are available in my at the link in the description. And you can also follow me on Spotify. My channel on Spotify is in the link in the description as well. Okay, so let's get started because we have so much to talk about and I'm very excited about this. This is important stuff, all right? It's going to be foundational and key to later ideas, like I said. So the question becomes, where do we begin? Now, I would love to just jump right into it and start talking about the Emerald Tablet and what it says and what it has to do with reality and examining it. But first we have to understand, before we can sort of crack the code, we have to understand the code that it is written in. So so what code is it written in? Well, it's written in this code right here. These are the alchemical symbolism that is used. We have the 4 elements, the 3 primes, the 2 principles, and the 1 thing or the 1 mind. And in order to understand what the Emerald Tablet of Hermes is talking about, we need to understand how these symbols relate to one another, what they are and what they represent. Because they don't represent physical things, they represent archetypes. And one last thing I have to mention, and this is really important, okay? People get confused about this, all right? So there's the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and then there's the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. We are talking about the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. The Emerald Tablet of Thoth is fake. The Emerald Tablet of Thoth, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth are said to be these 36,000-year-old tablets that originated at an Atlantis, that their letters speak to your mind. This is just something some guy in the 1900s said. His name is Maurice Doriel, and he just said it. You can believe him if you want, but he has no evidence for it. He said that he found these tablets, but then had to give them away to higher dimensional beings. So they're not real. I mean, you can believe they're real if you want, but there's no credible evidence to believe that they are real in any way whatsoever. Now, the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus is very real in that it's a legitimate ancient document. Now, it probably wasn't written by Hermes Trismegistus, but we do have records of it being at least medieval, if not longer. So it's at least 1200 to 1300 years old. So according to legend, the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus is very old, originating in the dawn of the Egyptian civilization. But that's a legend. You can believe that if you want, but we don't have anything to verify that. What we do have to verify, that academics and scholars have verified, that the Emerald Tablet appears in Arabic alchemical texts dated roughly to the 8th or 9th century CE. So making it at least somewhere around 1200 to 1300 years old. All right. So very important to understand, Emerald Tablets of Thoth, not real. Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, very real in that it's an ancient document that is at least around 1200 to 1300 years old, possibly older. Now, this the reason why the Emerald Tablet of Hermes is so important is because it is a key foundational alchemical text that is sort of the basis of the Western alchemical tradition, or highly influenced it. And people have been obsessed with it. Some people think it's about turning metal into gold. Others think that it's about creating the elixir of life to live forever. And you see, it is, in a certain way, it is about immortality, and it is about creating wealth. But it's symbolic. And we're going to be tracking this code to see what it symbolizes and what it really means. Anyway, a lot of people have been obsessed with them. Sir Isaac Newton actually created a translation of the tablet, and he might have died because of it. So in alchemy, a really important aspect of it is mercury. Mercury is highly poisonous. And so they have a hair from Sir Isaac Newton in some museum or something, and they found traces of mercury in his hair. So some theorize that maybe he died from mercury poison from trying to do alchemical experiments, possibly. We don't know, who knows, but it's a very big possibility. So that being said, hey, remember, this stuff is allegorical and metaphorical. So don't touch mercury. Mercury is very bad for you. Mercury is going to be, we're going to find out what it means. We've got it right here. And you know why? You can see that it's important because it's dead smack right in the center. It's extremely important and ties everything together, but not actual mercury, what it represents. So let's begin. Now that we know a little something about the Emerald Tablet and what it is, what does it say exactly? Well, to understand what it says, we have to understand the elements that make it up. So let's start with the 4 elements. We're going to start by understanding what fire is. And so let's see, I want to make sure that you guys can be able to see this. On screen, we are dealing with the element of fire. And the element of fire is represented by this symbol right here. Now, since we're talking about fire, it's appropriate to have the element that we're working with. So remember that fire, oh man, you can't even see that it's on because the camera, but it is indeed lit. So fire, remember, doesn't literally represent actual fire. What fire represents is something that is active, transformative, and purifying. It symbolizes energy, passion, willpower, and destruction for renewal. And you can just, obviously tell that by the nature of fire. It is active, it's transformative, and it changes things. How does it change things though? Well, because it usually burns them, so it's a very destructive force. So that's important to understand. What fire represents is that it's about willpower, transformation, energy, and change. In psychological terms, this would be called libido, which is psychic energy. Psychic not meaning like reading people's minds, but psychic just meaning of the psyche, the energy of the psyche, the energy of the mind, directedness, willpower, change, transformation. That is what fire represents. Now, another thing to understand about fire is that fire is considered to be active and masculine, okay? Talking about things in terms of gender can be really confusing, but I'm going to do it just because I want to show you traditionally how alchemy is understood. And traditionally, fire is considered masculine because it is considered to be active, okay? So that's what we have in terms, and I'm going to go through these kind of quickly because we have a lot to go through here, okay? So we have fire, which is active, and masculine, which has to do with transformation, change, and willpower, okay? It's very directed. Next, we have the element of air. Now, the element of air, we don't need to represent with a candle. We can represent the element of air with something like a pen. Now, the reason why we can represent the element of air with something like a pen is because air represents the mind, the intellect, communication, and creativity. So communication, creativity, very much having to do with the pen. Communication, intellect, creativity can all come from or is brought and manifest into reality through the pen. I mean, not only that, but it's a good representation of what it represents. So that is the pen related to air. Air is also considered masculine and active. So fire, willpower, transformation, air, intellect, and communication. These are both active and masculine. And you can tell what is active and masculine because they are triangles that are pointed up. When you have something that is pointed up, that's where that symbol comes from, by the way. The symbol for fire is considered masculine. The inverted triangle is considered feminine. And you could probably, that's why, when you have two triangles crossing over each other, such as in the hexagram, it represents the unification of opposing forces or polarized forces. Okay, so we've understood air. We've understood fire. Let us take a look at water. Now, water is also very important, which we can symbolize with water. So what is it about water? What is water representative of? Water is intuition, emotion, the unconscious, and healing. So the key things to understand is that it's related to the unconscious. Okay. Now the unconscious has often been described as like an ocean, because the unconscious is your mind. Your mind is conscious, has a conscious aspect and an unconscious aspect. The unconscious aspect are all those parts of your mind that do exist and are there, but you're not aware of them. And so it's considered deep, like a sea, because the sea is very deep, it's very dark, it's very mysterious. We don't really know what's in there. It's hard to explore, but there's a lot of secrets in there. There's a lot of treasure in there. So when we're talking about water, we are talking about intuition, the unconscious, and emotions. And this is considered passive and feminine. So finally, with regard to the elements, we'll talk about earth. Earth is another important one that is also passive and feminine. We can appropriately have some earth to represent earth. And so earth is associated with groundedness, structure, growth, and material manifestation. So it has to do with things like stability, job, relationships, things that keep you grounded and stable in the physical world and bringing things into existence. Because if you want something to occur, it has to occur in the physical world. So earth is also passive and considered feminine. So you have here the four elements. Fire. Fire, which represents will, active, masculine. Air, which represents intellect, active, masculine. Water, which represents intuition and emotion, passive, feminine. And earth, which represents groundedness and stability, passive, feminine. All right, so these are the four elements. Now, the important part to understand about these four elements is that clearly we're not talking about the literal, we're not talking about literally earth, literally water, literally fire, or literally air. You could also use incense or something to represent air if you'd like. It's not about that, because remember, what we're doing is we are building a symbolic language to communicate with our unconscious. Doesn't have to do with any of this stuff in a literal way. Absolutely nothing. I mean, you know, the ancients believed that it did, but we know today that it's a vast simplification of what we understand chemistry to be. But in symbolic terms, this is about forging a communication, because now you have these symbols that relate to aspects of your mind. Fire, you can now associate with willpower. Air, you can associate with communication. Water, you can associate with the watery depths of the unconscious mind. And earth, you can associate with earth. I know some of these are off camera, but you get the idea. You get the picture. So let's blow that out. What we have now is an understanding of this bottom row. This bottom row is the elemental row, because it represents, well, the elements, the four elements. And these are four aspects of your psyche. Now, I've talked about it, like, why does this matter? Who cares? I've talked about this in other videos, that it matters because when you start to balance these symbols, whether it is through ritual or some other means, it's a communication to stay balanced to your unconscious mind. It's about balancing your willpower, your intellect, your unconscious, and your groundedness in reality, and having all these aspects of yourself working together in harmony. Obviously, just thinking about this stuff isn't going to make it happen. doing rituals with it isn't going to automatically make it happen. What it does is it gets your unconscious helping you, because you could do it consciously without this stuff, but your unconscious isn't going to be helping you unless you've done other things to get your unconscious going. But in general, if you ignore all unconscious aspects, you can still do it in your conscious, but it will be much easier if you have your unconscious and consciousness working together. Like I said in another video, it's like if you just use your left foot, yeah, you can go forward, but you can go forward a lot faster and with a lot more maneuverability if you use your right foot and your left foot together. That's what happens when you're using the unconscious and the unconsciousness together. You're going to be able to navigate life much easier, much more effectively, and manifest the life that you want. And the most important part is reaching higher levels of consciousness. I know sometimes that seems boring to a lot of people, but really that is the key to all this, is reaching higher levels of consciousness. And you begin to reach higher levels of consciousness when you make these keys to relate to different aspects of your psyche, because you begin to make them conscious. These archetypes are normally unconscious, but by applying symbolism to them and manipulating them in consciousness, we are accessing them and forging a communication. Okay, so these are the 4 elements. Now, what we're going to do is move up to the 3 primes. Now, the 3 primes are different. Here is the bottom row we can think of as the elemental realm. The middle row, we are now moving to the spiritual realm. So in alchemy, you've probably heard of the 4 elements, the 4 elements, the 4 elements. But there's also what's been called the 5th element, the quintessence, the hidden element, the secret element. And the hidden element, the secret element, the 5th element, the quintessence, is actually spirit or mind or the center of your subjectivity. Because think about it. What you are doing is that you are the magician, you are the magus, standing at the center of all this, manipulating the 4 elements. You are spirit, which is the organizing principle. That's why in a pentagram, spirit is at the top of the pentagram, because it represents the power of spirit over matter. And by the way, this is why Satanists, occultists, and not all occultists, but usually left-hand pathers invert the pentagram to place the flesh or the world of the elements over matter or over spirit. They invert it. There's a more positive way to interpret the inverted pentagram as being the descent of spirit into matter. But typically, that's not the typical interpretation. Typically, inverted pentagram is inverting the relationship between matter and mind, or matter and spirit. But that's neither here nor there. I digress. So anyway, like I said, the 5th element is considered spirit, but really spirit is on a completely different plane, a completely different level. And so when we are working in the this next level with the primes, we are working in the realm of spirit. We've discovered the elemental row and understood more or less what they mean. Now we are moving to the spiritual level with salt, mercury, and sulfur, right? So these are not elements. These are what are known as primes. They're on a completely different level. Salt, mercury, and sulfur. And you'll notice that mercury is smack dab right in the middle. That's going to be very important, okay? So let's start with sulfur. Sulfur is this symbol right here. You'll notice that it also has an upwards pointing triangle, and it is considered active and masculine. I have, see if you guys can see this on camera, if it'll focus. This is sulfur. Now, the thing about sulfur is that it's highly flammable, okay? Sulfur is highly flammable. And so it is related to fire, but it's a little bit different than fire. So fire is willpower and transformation. Sulfur is the impetus to focus one's will on the divine aspect of reality. So, in other words, it represents the desire and the passion for the spiritual. All right. So it's not just will in general, it's will towards truth, to the higher self, to the essence. It's a very directed sort of will. And you can see how things are becoming more about spirit now. More, we're on a higher level. We're no longer just talking about elements in general. Oh, willpower, intuition, whatever. Because you can use willpower to mow your lawn or whatever. This isn't just willpower in general. This is specifically willpower on the spiritual level. Okay? So, sulfur represented by sulfur. Now, here's what I want you guys to notice. Let's make this a little more even here. So like I said, sulfur is the impetus towards the spiritual. And what's interesting about sulfur is that sulfur is composed of air and fire. So see how it makes its own little triangle here? Sulfur is air and fire combined. It is the fire, the drive, the will, and the intellect, which is ultimately guiding the will towards the spiritual. So we have the spirit, which is composed of fire and air. And I guess I should have put the little card out, but you can, I'm sure, figure that out. You don't need the little card, but there you go. So, next, let's take a look at Mercury. Now, Mercury is considered feminine, and this element is going to be very important because it ties everything together. Mercury symbolizes fluidity, adaptability, and connection. It's considered the soul. So this is considered spirit. This is considered the soul. And it's essentially your capacity of imagination and mind in the form of change and adaptation and connection. It's using your mind in a very specific way. It can be associated with the conscious and unconscious mind, whereas fire or sulfur is more in the background. And it's like in the background urging you to go towards the physical, or I'm sorry, the spiritual. Mercury, you could even think of Mercury as like the center of your field of consciousness. And this is very important. And so this is, of course, well, it would be represented by Mercury. I am not going to, bring out actual Mercury right now because it's very poisonous and I don't feel like being poisoned. So don't mess around with Mercury. It's very, very poisonous. However, what we can do is we can symbolically represent Mercury by this. So what this is, let's put it pointing up so that we have spirit pointing forward. This is a type of metal, very solid metal, known as gallium. Now, gallium has a very interesting property. Gallium has the property that it melts at very low temperatures, and it can become a liquid. So that's what we're going to do right now. Now, mercury itself is usually in a liquid form. It's liquid metal, and it's also called quicksilver. So hopefully this actually works, because we're just going to leave this here. And hopefully it works because it's very cold in here and the air is kind of trying to blow the candle out. So hopefully that actually works. But well, so basically what we're saying here is that mercury is a liquid metal, but mercury can also be a solid, like gallium. Like I just showed you, gallium is very solid. mercury can also become solid. So mercury is a solid, it's a liquid, and if you apply heat to it and vaporize it, it can become a gas. So like air. So it has all these different properties within it. So it's a very fluid and adaptable prime. And this is why it serves as the connection, connecting all the different principles and elements together. And so mercury is considered to be composed of water and air. So air, the intellect, and water, the vast realms of the unconscious, emotion, and intuition. But you notice it's kind of missing that fire, that drive. But they share together this element of air. And because they share an element, they have the potential for connecting because they have an element in common. So what this means is that one of the goals of the alchemists is to unite mercury with sulfur. Mercury is the passive feminine element. Sulfur is the active masculine element. And so their goal is really the alchemical wedding, which is uniting essentially the drive and will to the spiritual with the imagination and the mind, so that you can combine your intellectual, imaginative, conscious powers with the drive to reach spiritual essence. In other words, higher levels of consciousness. So the goal in one of the higher steps of alchemy, which we'll talk about another time. We're not talking about the 7 steps today. We'll talk about the 7 steps perhaps next week. But the goal, the importance of mercury is using it to combine it with sulfur so that you have those two forces working together with you to drive yourself towards the spiritual. I don't know if this is going to get hot enough or not because it's very windy in here. But we'll see. We'll let it sit there for a while. Hopefully it will melt. So that being said, let's move this out of the way. Put this over here. Let's talk about salt. Here we have salt. Now, salt you would typically associate with the body, and salt is associated with the body. But you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute. We're in the spiritual row. What's the body doing in the spiritual row? Doesn't it make more sense for that to be more down here with Earth? Well, it's not just the spiritual, or I'm sorry, it's not just the body. You'll notice a couple things here. If it were just the body, it would just be associated with Earth, but it's not. It's associated with Earth and water. And remember, water is the material domain, Earth is the material domain. Water is the realm of the unconscious mind. Okay. And so it has an element of mind, water. So this salt is not just purely material, but it has an element of mind in it. And guess what? Mercury has this common, just like, see, mercury sits in the middle. So just like it has a common element with sulfur, and thus it can connect with sulfur, mercury has another common element with salt, and thus can connect with salt. And thus mercury serves as the bridge between the body, the mind, and the spirit. So what does the body have to do with this? Because remember, when you unify the mind and the spirit, you're directing your mind, your conscious, and your imaginative powers towards reaching higher levels of consciousness. What does salt have to do with anything? Salt is about manifestation. Salt is about bringing your newfound consciousness into the material world to manifest your will, to create what you so will in the material world. So you'll notice the symbol of salt is divided in two like that. Why is it divided in two like that? The top half represents above. The bottom half represents a below. As above, so below. As above can represent the immaterial, the spiritual, the mental. The below represents the earth, the physical domain. So it is a unification of, once you connect it, once you start having Mercury and spirit connect to your actual, this means having, instead of just having higher, without this, you're just reaching higher consciousness and sitting in your, on your couch thinking about how great you are. I'm just kidding, but you know what I mean. With this, you're actually getting out into the real world and making your will happen, manifesting it in reality. And Mercury, the mind, the imagination, is the soul, is what connects all these things together and allows you to accomplish those aspects. And so you might be wondering, well, why did they choose salt? That seems like a very weird thing to represent that. Well, it's not actually, because if you take a look at salt, if, we're not just talking about Earth, right? Earth, this is Earth, obviously. We're not talking about that. We're talking about salt. Now, salt is very cool. Salt is a crystal, and you can see that it has these beautiful crystal formations. Let me see if I can put it on the other camera so that you can see it even better. If it'll focus, perhaps. Please focus. There we go. If you can see that, it has these very beautiful patterns. Get my face out of there. So this is why salt is used, because it represents the structured force of, so it has structure to it. So that structure that it has to it is sort of representing the idea of spirit in matter, of soul in matter, of mind in matter. It's not just chaotic matter. It's matter that has been formed into a very beautiful structure. And so that is why salt is representative of the body fused with soul and spirit, manifesting your will into reality. And you can see the gallium, it's becoming a liquid. See that? And this shows that this particular element is fluid. It's adaptable and can therefore be a solid, a liquid, or a vapor, and unite these principles together. And gallium is really super cool, by the way. You can actually touch it and it's fine. So we'll just continue to let that melt. Just leaves a little, yeah, see? Not too much. Anyway, it's very cool. And it's a great substitute for mercury because it has very similar properties. Please do your own research still. Don't go out and mess around with the stuff. Read up on it. But anyway, as you can see, we're on a completely different level now. We're not just using the 4 elements. We're using items that have very interesting properties. The fiery aspect of sulfur, the mercurial aspect of transformation, fluidity, and the salt aspect of crystallized will. That's kind of what you can think of it as like your will crystallized into reality. And remember, the reason why that I'm even bringing these out and showing you these things is because the goal here is to create a system of symbolism to communicate with your unconscious. And you're doing this on different levels. One, you have this symbol, right? You have this symbol for salt, which is nice. But when you have something something tangible to associate it with, something that you can really ingrain into your mind and associate with your psyche, you're starting to create that symbolism that will allow you to communicate with your unconscious mind that you wouldn't be able to do without these elements, because it would be like like a dream. You know, if you had a dream involving salt and fire and you know, mercury or whatever, you would know that your mind is trying to communicate a certain idea to you through these particular symbols. And it's not just through dreams. I just use that as a quick example because we're all familiar with dreams. And here, I think we get the picture. We can move this out of the way. All right. So the main thing to take away from this so far, okay, we have the 2 rows, the elemental row, and we have the spiritual row. And as we've seen, the aspect of Mercury is incredibly important because it has the common factors. Here are the elements that make up salt. Here are the elements that make up fire. And it has the common factor between it. Oh, one thing that I kind of want to point out here, it's interesting. So traditionally, sulfur is considered masculine and Mercury is considered feminine. That's how it's traditionally conceived of. But I just want to throw something out there for our, you know, non-binary friends out there, an interesting way that this can be interpreted. So if you look at sulfur, it makes sense for sulfur to be considered masculine because it has 2 masculine elements to it. However, what's interesting about Mercury is that it has an active masculine principle and a passive feminine principle. Whereas salt is the one that has 2 feminine principles. So Mercury has 2 masculine principles, or I'm sorry, sulfur has 2 masculine, salt has 2 feminine, Mercury has masculine and feminine. So I just want to point out, traditionally speaking, Mercury is considered feminine. However, remember, we are creating a system of symbolism to communicate with your unconscious. So it's not about being strictly factual or following these rigid guidelines. It's what it communicates to you and resonates with you. So I'm just throwing that out there, is that you could very well consider Mercury to be androgynous, because it actually makes a lot more sense, to be honest, because it's in the middle and it shares these 2 polarized properties and it connects everything together into this like androgynous state. So long story short, you can consider this feminine or you can consider this androgynous. It's really up to you and what resonates with you more. I will probably typically refer to it as feminine just because that's what it's traditionally considered. And so when you read if you read an alchemical text, you'll know what's being talked about because anyway, but just so you know, I honestly think it would be better to consider this androgynous. It makes more sense because then you would sort of have the androgynous factor in between connecting, let's say, a feminine and masculine principle. Makes more sense, but that's not how it's traditionally conceived of. I just thought I would throw it out there because I thought it was very interesting. So we've understood the elemental role. We've understood the spiritual. And by the way, I'm going through this very fast. This is obviously, this is an overview. All right. So if you're kind of like, wait, hold on. You know, you're kind of losing me here. Don't worry. This is a very general overview. Later on, we'll learn things like the 7 steps of alchemy, and we'll take much deeper time to understand exactly what each element is, how to work with the various elements, how they relate to other things like tarot, Kabbalah, magic, ritual, etc. But today is just a big overview because this is going to kind of give you the key, the map that's going to make everything else be a lot easier and make a lot of sense. Okay. So we have the 4 elements, the 3 primes, elementary, spiritual. Now we could consider this like the divine realm. And this is when we're it's almost like we're getting into the collective unconscious at this point. Okay. So this is the divine realm. We're getting into the collective unconscious. And this is what brings us to the Emerald Tablet. Remember, this video was about the secret code of the Emerald Tablet. Remember that? So I kind of had to lay out this other stuff first. Now, the interesting thing is to get to these parts and to really understand what these parts are, I want to talk about the Emerald Tablet a little bit. So before we talk about the Emerald Tablet, I want to talk about someone named Empedocles. Empedocles is probably one of my favorite if not my most favorite, pre-Socratic philosopher. There's a lot of philosophers that I like that are pre-Socratic, but Empedocles is right up there. Now, why are we talking about Empedocles? Because Empedocles was the guy who developed the four element theory. You know, all the alchemists, everyone who uses four elements, that was introduced by Empedocles. So Empedocles brought in this system of four elements. But here's the interesting part. It wasn't just the four elements. These four elements were ruled by forces of unity and separation, or what he called love and strife. And so Empedocles, he was a Greek philosopher, and he believed that the four elements were under constant change and transformation and combination by the influence of two cosmic forces, love and strife, or unity and separation. So you can think of, you know, there are these forces. You have the four elements, which Empedocles was saying makes up the material world. That's not what we're saying, obviously. But Empedocles said, okay, so you have all these elements that make up the material world, and you have love and strife, or unity and separation, that causes these elements to enter into different combinations, different changes, and different structures. Love unites the elements. Love unites things together, while strife divides elements. And this creates cycles of creation and destruction. So he believed that reality was a cyclical process that goes through periods of creation and destruction. And through periods of, so basically there would be periods of pure love, pure strife, and in between phases where love and strife are present. And that's really where life is found, in those in-between phases. So you can imagine there's different cycles. You go through cycles of pure love, then strife enters into the picture. And so there's a combo and almost like a contention between the two, and then it gets resolved. Strife wins out. Now love vanishes. Strife only exists. Then love comes back, and they again contend and go through this evolutionary process. And then finally love wins out, and then there's only love. And there's this cyclical process. If you're familiar with Neogenian philosophy, you'll recognize this as the Genesis singularity, the moment of complete and total perfection, after which is the Big Bang, a state of complete and total separation, a state of unity to a state of separation. So you can see Empedocles was very close on the mark, seeing reality as being guided by phases of unity and separation, which is how reality works. He was very close and on the money. There's some really interesting things about Empedocles. Empedocles was an early advocate for vegetarianism, which is awesome. I'm a vegan. He thought that eating animals was an abomination because he believed in reincarnation. So he thought that all living things were interconnected, and that souls would reincarnate through various forms of life. So anyways, he thought that killing animals and eating animals would be like eating family, because he saw us as all one like soul family that's incarnating in different bodies. That is essentially one of the very big reasons why I am vegan, because I do believe in reincarnation. I consider it relocalization, and I believe in that we're all on an evolutionary journey, and I want to make that evolutionary journey as best as possible for every soul, every mind in reality, including animals, as best as we possibly can. Anyway, so I think that that's very cool. And Empedocles' death is really interesting. Okay, so there's different accounts on how he died. Here, one account on how he died was that he went with his followers onto the top of a mountain of an active volcano and said, "I am God," and threw himself into the volcano, I guess to prove it or something, which is like a very badass way to go. Don't do that. That's not what it means to be God. I just think that was interesting. He seemed like a very, philosophers these days are so goddamn boring. If you look at the philosophers of the pre-Socratics, they were jumping into volcanoes and building secret societies and leading revolutions against tyrants. And they were badass. Today, philosophers are usually pretty damn boring. Anyways, Empedocles was a badass. He's very cool. Another account of his death said that the volcano erupted and sent him flying to the moon, which he landed on, and that he still exists, or he existed on he was on the moon surviving on dew. Now, of course, that wasn't meant to be taken literal. It was probably meant to be taken symbolic, such as reaching a state of transcendence or otherworldly existence. But still, pretty cool stories. Empedocles is a very, very interesting character. So why am I talking about Empedocles? All right. The reason why I'm talking about Empedocles is because we're going to talk about the Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet is an alchemical text that has to do with the 4 elements. Empedocles was the guy who brought in the 4 element theory. But not only did he bring in the 4 element theory, though, there was another aspect to it. It was the 2 forces. And you might be seeing where I'm going with this, because we have 2 elements here in the spiritual domain. Or I'm sorry, in the divine domain. And now Empedocles didn't talk about the primes, okay? So Empedocles didn't talk about the primes, but he talked about 2 forces that had to do with the ordering and transformation of the elements. Now, let's take a look at what the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus says. So let me bring this up. Where do I have it here? Okay. So the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus is very short. It's just a couple paragraphs. So we're going to read it right now. And I'm going to explain what this has to do with everything. Okay. So, in truth, without deceit, certain and most veritable. This means, hey, listen up. I'm not lying. This is super true. That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. So that which is above and that which is below basically means there's a correspondence between the microcosm and the macrocosm. That means what exists in the macroscopic world follows the same rules and laws of the microscopic world, and what happens on the internal plane in your inner realm happens in the outer physical realm. Now, not exactly, okay? I get people, there are like materialists who go, well, quantum mechanics doesn't operate the same way as astronomy. That's not really what it's talking about. It's talking about the fundamental essence of reality. The fundamental way that reality works is all runs the same thing. If you can understand how certain aspects of reality works, you can understand how other aspects of reality works. How everything is basically interconnected. The above is connected with the below. The inner is connected with the outer. So one way to understand, so as above, so below, is usually, not in this, but it's usually followed with as within, so without. The inner world reflects the outer world. Here's a really easy way to understand what that means. When you go to sleep and dream, and you're in a dream world, that outer world is actually your inner world. It seems like an outer world, but it's a reflection of your inner world. It's built by your unconscious. So as within, so without. And so it's just saying that same sort of idea happens in this reality. But it's a collective dream, not a singular dream. So it works a bit different, not exactly the same. Can't just change things literally, by thinking about it really hard. But we can begin to change our lives and the world when we get our internal processes working with our conscious processes, which is what alchemy is all about. Anyway, so that which is above is like that which is below, all to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. So what is the one thing? Let me explain in just a minute. So, and just as all things have come from this one thing through the meditation of one mind, so do all created things originate from this one thing through transformation. So here's what this is essentially saying. The one mind generates the one thing and all reality, meaning this is a mental reality that generates. So what's the difference between the one mind and the one thing? Think about a dream. The one thing would be like the dream. The one mind would be like a dreamer. And the dream comes from the dreamer. So the one thing comes from the one mind. In terms of the reality that we exist in right now. And so all things come from this one thing through the meditation of the one mind. The one mind brings it into existence. So all created things originate from this one thing through transformation. And so this one mind and one thing, we have representative here as at the very top, and through. So this particular symbol is known as, this is usually used to symbolize the philosopher's stone or the accomplishment of the great work. And so you can see within it, there's a triangle, a square, and a circle. And what it's just kind of saying is that it unifies everything together. Everything is in harmony. Everything is in perfection, such that all these forces fit together. They're sort of sitting in there in potential, like an egg that's going to hatch. And when the egg hatches, well, all these things flow out of it. And so you have this one thing, the one mind, the one mind that generates the one thing. And so this at the top is essentially the one mind, and the entire thing you could also think of as the one thing, because it all originates. This is the root, and it all unfolds, right? These things are not separate. They all unfold from it. Okay. So we have this one mind, which is going to generate the rest of reality. Okay. So it says everything comes from the one thing through the meditation of the one mind. So do all things originate from this one thing through transformation. Its father is the sun. Its mother is the moon. This is the symbol for the sun. This is the symbol for the moon. The wind carries it in its belly. This can be associated with water because of, fluid associated with gestation. Its nurse is the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. It is inherent strength. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. So you see, we have the mention of the sun, the moon, and the four principles. Something I want to mention here. So my interpretation is a little different than the traditional interpretation. The traditional interpretation usually equates the sun with fire and the moon with water. So when it says its father is the sun, usually, oh, that's the fire. Its mother is the moon, oh, that's the water. The wind, oh, the air carries it in its belly, and then we have the earth and the fire. So anyway, you'll notice that water isn't mentioned explicitly. It's about, but a belly is mentioned in terms of gestation, which is related to fluid. Anyway, the reason why I point this out is because most interpretations you'll see of this will basically think that it's, just about the four elements, right? Just about the four elements down here. It's, oh, the sun is the fire, the moon is the water, and then it directly mentions the wind and the earth. So in my interpretation of this, and remember, when it comes to interpreting things like this, there's no really right or wrong ways to do it. It's about building a symbolic structure to communicate with your unconscious. And so it's about what resonates with you, what it means for you, because it's not about being objectively true. This is much different than things like, understanding the mathematical nature of reality. This is about building a language to your unconscious. So it's about what resonates with you. It's not about what is objectively true. This is about subjectivity here. It's about building a subjective language for yourself. So it's about what resonates with you. However, I put forward this suggestion because I believe it is very effective for understanding the process of alchemy and serving as a foundation for understanding other systems like tarot, Kabbalah, and magic. So I interpret when it says its father is the sun and its mother is the moon, I interpreted it as being these forces. When it mentions the wind, I associate it with air. When it mentions the gestation in the belly, I represent water. And then when it mentions earth and fire. So here, then you would have these two forces in this, again, usually it's just mostly, you don't have the primes or the principles. You just have the four elements and like the one thing, right? Here in this version that I'm putting forward, we have the one thing, we have the true principles, and then we have the four elements that are explicitly mentioned. Oh, one quick thing I want to mention, I just want to throw out some credit. This very cool, so you might recognize this symbol. This is known as the tetractys. not with the alchemical symbols. Usually it's just in terms of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's usually just numbered. So this is without the alchemical symbols, just the triangle without the symbols is known as the Pythagorean tetractys. And it was worshipped by the Pythagoreans, who believed that reality was a mathematical reality and generated by numbers, which is very cool because, you know, in the Neogenian system, we do believe that this is a mathematical reality. So projecting the alchemical symbolism onto the tetractys is a very cool idea. And I just want to throw out some credit because I first saw this introduced on a website called The Digital Ambler by someone who was just called Polyphones. And I couldn't find any information about them, such as their actual name or anything else. But that's where I first saw this. The Digital Ambler by someone named Polyphones. They projected the alchemical symbolism onto the tetractys, and I think that this is very important here, very, very key. So where was I? Okay, so what do these things mean? Let's see here. Let's go back to move that out of the way. So we have the sun and the moon and the one. It's good enough, I guess. It's a little out of sync. Okay. So more or less, this is the pattern that we have. Now, there's a couple things that I want to note about this. So what are these forces? Okay. Now, these forces are what you could think of them in many different ways. However, I think that the most effective way to think of them is to think of the sun as force and think of the moon as form. Very simple. Force and form. The reason why I think it's the best to think about it that way is because it makes sense in this system and will allow us to use this symbolism in the context of other systems and make things easy, make things link together, make things very compatible, okay? But essentially, this is usually considered masculine, a solar force considered masculine. The moon is usually considered the feminine force. Again, you don't have to think about things in terms of gender. It often makes things confusing to do it that way. So you don't have to think about that way, but one can. So anyway, essentially what this means is you have the one thing that gives rise to the sun and the moon, force and form. Remember, this doesn't literally represent the sun or the moon, okay? This has nothing to do with the sun and the moon at all. It's just symbolism to represent the idea of force and the idea of form. And so essentially you have this idea where the one mind generates a force, which is then given form. And so what we're going to note here is that we can see the moon. Okay, so here let's see if we can understand this. All right. So we have the moon and the sun as force and form. You could think of it as male and female, or the father and the mother. You don't have to. Some people do. All right. But here, let's see how this all connects. So on the moon, let's take a look at just this here, right? This side, all projected. So you have the one thing, or the one mind, which generates the moon, which generates salt, which kind of makes sense, right? It's sort of it's combined with earth and water, and that makes sense for the moon. You know, if you think about the moon, you could think of symbolically the moon. You know, it makes sense. It's form. Remember, the moon represents form, and salt is that formed, that matter imbued with the formation of soul and divinity and spirit within it. And then you have earth, which is, you know, very, very solid. So you can see how these things kind of all go together, where it's sort of different aspects of it unfolding, Now, on the opposite side, you have the sun with sulfur, which makes a lot of sense. It's that fiery spirit. Remember here, we had that earthy, watery soul. Here we have the fiery spirit, which makes sense with the sun, and then just fire itself. So you have this sort of very solar, forceful, fiery row. And then you have this very watery, earthy, soulful row. And then, of course, in the center, you have Mercury. So again, you could think of Mercury as being, if you have the moon in Mercury and the sun with sulfur and Mercury. Again, you have this very important, and this is going to be a key thing in understanding other systems as well. Mercury is very important, or rather, what Mercury represents is very important. So it's the, sort of the uniting force here. And then, of course, at the elemental level, it serves as the uniting force down here. So you have salt, which is these two, sulfur, which is these two, Mercury, which links these two, the moon, which is these two, the sun, which is these two, Mercury, which links these two, and then these two, of course, are linked by the one thing. So you can see that this is why you can kind of think of this as like the center of your subjectivity, the center of your awareness, playing with and linking all these forces together, having to do with like the very elemental forces, then having to do with, once you start reaching higher levels of consciousness, understanding like your connection to spirit and manifesting your will into reality. And then if you want to get to really high levels, you can start accessing the divine realm, which is sort of like the collective unconscious and, ultimately the source itself. And so this symbolism is very important and very key. Now, the Emerald Tablet continues here. Let's see. It says, it rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. So what this means is, it says, it rises from the earth to heaven. So you start here. You rise from the earth to heaven. What can we understand this to mean? We can understand this as the journey of the soul, who starts off as at a very elementary level, very basic level, masters the elements, masters the basics, then moves on to the spiritual level, connecting to the higher self, manifesting will into reality, going higher by connecting to the divine realm and the collective unconscious, and understanding how to manifest one's universal will, as in like shaping the world and transforming things on a collective level rather than just individual, like reaching, extremely high levels of like all awareness and hyper awareness and engaging and creating a new planetary teleocratic. Like here you're getting into like collective divine territory where you are essentially shaping reality itself, not just in accordance to like the things that you want, or even just like personal aspects, but working to shape the course of history. Essentially, is what you're doing when you're getting to these levels. So what it's saying is, it rises from the earth to heaven, and this is the journey of a soul. We can as it masters all these aspects, and then it descends again to earth. So thereby combining within itself the powers. And then it descends again to earth, thereby combining itself with the powers of the above and the below. So you go all the way up, and then you kind of go all the way down again. And what this kind of means is you don't want to keep your head in the clouds. You want to kind of make that journey down to realize how to, it's just sort of like emphasizing the aspect of manifestation. This is sort of like rising up to higher levels of consciousness. Bing, you attain it. and then you want to bring that power back down to earth to affect the change in the elementary world through everything that you have learned and all the powers that you will have acquired. The Emerald Tablet continues by saying, thus you will obtain the glory of the whole universe. All obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all powers because it overcomes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. This force that you have, it overcomes everything and penetrates everything. So it's within everything. It is everything. In this way, the universe created. From this comes many wondrous applications because this is the pattern. So, right, it was explaining basically like how the universe was created, but so when I talked about like the soul's evolutionary journey, that was more on the microcosmic singular soul level, but this also applies to the macrocosmic unfolding of the universe itself and the collective of all of us together. So it's essentially saying that what was explained here was how the universe was created, but because of this, there are many wondrous applications because this is the pattern, meaning this pattern that reflects the universe reflects you and reflects your soul and reflects your mind and reflects your structure. That's what as above, so below means. Basically, it means this pattern can be applied to the entirety of the universe, or it can be applied on the level of you as an individual, as above, so below, as within, so without. This is why when you begin to understand reality, this is why they say know thyself and you will understand the universe and the gods, because your pattern is the same as their pattern and they are actually you. They're all inside you. They are what we all are as different aspects of ourselves, different archetypes, different manifestations. And it continues by saying, therefore am I called thrice greatest Hermes, having all three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Herein have I completely explained the operations of the sun. So here I'm called thrice greatest Hermes, having all three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Here have I completed and explained the operation of the sun. So he's called Hermes Trismegistus, which means the thrice greatest Hermes. There's a couple different ways to understand this. People were called the thrice greatest a lot in ancient times. It basically meant really, really, really. So if you were called the thrice greatest, it meant you're the really, really, really greatest. The greatest. For example, in Gnosticism, Barbelo, which is typically considered a she, is also called thrice male, which means the really, really, really male, the male. Because up in that realm, things are about androgyny and perspective, sometimes male, sometimes female, depending on your orientation and understanding and direction. We don't have time to get into that. But that's what thrice greatest usually means, like the really, really great. However, some have interpreted, I believe David Houck interprets it as meaning thrice greatest as like having mastered basically like the three primes, body, soul, and spirit. I have, because he says, I am called thrice greatest Hermes, having all three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. So according to David's interpretation, that is mastery of the body, mastery of the soul, and mastery of the spirit. And again, with this stuff, it's not about what is factually correct. It's about what resonates with you. So if that resonates with you, go with it. If you think, no, that sounds weird, I don't like that, forget it. It doesn't matter. But this particular symbolism and structure, okay, having understand the basics of the four elements, the basics of the three primes, the basics of the two principles, and the basis of the one thing and the one mind will be key as we understand. So like, I think next week we'll probably start taking a look at the 7 steps of alchemy, of inner alchemy, which is going to involve things that we haven't talked about yet, which are the planets and the metals. And this is going to get into the real work on transforming yourself, like how to actually do it. But having all this in the background is going to serve as a way to understand that much easier. And like I said, again, I can't stress enough how much this will help understanding other elements when it comes to magic, tarot, and Kabbalah. This is going to help immensely. One other thing that I want to point out real quick is when it comes to this, I want to remind you that this is the source. Everything originates from this. And a helpful way I know this is kind of, you can think of this as like the singularity, okay? And this can be kind of hard for some people to understand. Like, what does that even mean? Well, you can see how they all relate to each other, obviously in a structure, but you can see if we understand it in that, it's earth and water that make up salt, and what makes up mercury is the water and air, which was in the salt. And then we had the fire and air, which is now in mercury, related to that, which all generated from the sun and the moon, which came from the one thing. So that's like an easy, intuitive way to understand it. The one thing contains all those things within it. And this is kind of like the pre-Big Bang state. This is the Genesis singularity. Then the Big Bang happened and that happened. And everything is unorganized and everything's a mess. And this is like what our souls are right now. Our souls are unorganized. Our souls are a mess. We need to organize it into that pattern where everything is working together in harmony. So there's a couple things that I would like you guys to do. I would actually like you guys to, Laura had this really good idea. So shout out to Laura. I would like you guys to actually make some of these cards yourself. Okay. Draw the symbol of the 4 elements and the 3 primes, and on them write their different attributes, write what they represent, because this is going to really solidify and begin, because if you just hear about this, it's not going to do anything. It's about actually engaging with it. If you just watch videos about painting, you're not going to become a good painter. You have to actually paint for anything to happen for you to make a picture. And some people are like, I don't get why alchemy is not working, because they're just watching lectures on it. Just to watch lectures on it is not going to do anything. You have to actually engage with it to form that connection. You kind of have to think of like you're building a relationship with your unconscious. And so you have to get to know it, and you want to build that language so that you can be able to get to know it. So when you actually engage with it, draw the different symbols on a piece of paper or whatever, and list their different attributes. Really easy, really simple to do. And also, I would also recommend that you draw this as well. So we can call this the alchemical tetractys. So draw the alchemical tetractys, the 4 elements and the 3 primes if you want, and list the attributes as well. Here's an extra thing you can do. Don't worry about this if it feels like too much, but an extra thing you can do is go out and find stuff that relates to these elements. Like I said, get some dirt for the earth, get some water for the for the water. You can get, incense to represent air. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Just get whatever. Remember, it's what resonates and is intuitive for you. So just the act of you doing this is communicating to your unconscious, hey, this is like, your unconscious is like, why the fuck is he doing this? Or why the fuck are they doing this? And so this will mean that you're beginning to stir up your unconscious to pay attention to these different symbols, that they're going to be important. And so it's about what resonates with you. There's only one wrong way to do it. And the wrong way to do it is to get mercury. Don't get mercury. For mercury, don't use actual mercury. Mercury is extremely poisonous. So, just be careful, use only safe things, but gather some items to associate with that. If that's too hard right now, don't worry about it, but that's what I would recommend. 4 elements, 3 primes, tetractys, their attributes. And if you want, I would recommend it, but if you don't have time, I get it. Find things that go with and relate to these things as well. And so then, like I said, if this was a lot, because it was a big overview, and I cut out a lot. I wanted to talk about so much more. But anyway, like I said, this was a lot. I am going to be creating these notes, these alchemical notes that's going to have all this in here. I already released one part of it from the introduction, which talked about its history and a brief overview. This I'm going to create as notes as well. And they are honestly very handy. it's hard to find good information on alchemy. It's kind of scattered all over the place, and sometimes you find good stuff, sometimes you find nonsense. It's kind of hard. So anyway, anyone who is a member on YouTube or on Patreon will have access to that. Just go, if you're a YouTube member, just go to the members tab and it'll be right there for you to download in a Google Drive link. Also, as a reminder, my books are available. If you're interested in what we're talking about today, Psychogenesis would be the one to start with. Even though it's the last book, book number 5, this is going to be everything that's related to alchemy. This is an alchemical book. I don't mention alchemy once in here. I don't mention fire or earth or wind or what. I don't mention any of that. But it talks about the process in psychological terms, in terms that would be used in psychology and philosophy. Because I want to show that this is all rooted in actual legit psychological processes. And if I put in a bunch of stuff about earth, air, water, mercury, and sulfur, you'd get someone reading it and thinking it was a bunch of crazy nonsense. But no, it's actually rooted in very deep and powerful psychology. This symbolism is another way to understand it. And it's a practical way for forging. Like, a lot of people go like, okay, but how do you actually do this stuff? This is part of how you actually begin to do it. It's about, making the unconscious conscious. Okay, how do you do that? This is part of making the unconscious conscious. You are now aware of elements of your psyche that you weren't aware of previously, like the shadow self. When I talk about the shadow self, which is an archetype, so many people don't even know what the shadow self is or that it exists. When I explain the shadow self, you become aware of its existence, which is the first step of making the unconscious conscious, because now you just know that it's there. The next step will be to understand what it's made of, and the next step will be to integrate it. But the first step is just knowing that it's there. You know it's there. You're a little more conscious than everyone else because you're aware of a certain structure in your mind. Well, likewise, we have all these different structures. These all represent different archetypal patterns. Not only now are you aware that they exist within you, but you have a system of symbolism that you have attached to it that your unconscious can understand. So you're bridging a link from the unconscious to the conscious and how they all relate to each other as well. So this is about building that living map. And again, if you just hear about it, it's not going to do anything. If you actually engage with it, that is where it's like if you want to learn a new language. If you just watch videos about the language, I mean, maybe you'll pick up some words, but you actually have to practice. You actually have to try writing the letters. You have to say them out loud. You have to try putting sentence structures together. You have to talk to people in that language, etc. So anyway, next week we will probably do the 7 stages of inner alchemy, which we will actually which will begin understanding like practical applications of this stuff. And then that's where we're going to bring in the planets and the metals as well, which are going to be even more archetypal symbols to deal with as we build up and complexify and structure this symbolic language that we're using to communicate with your unconscious. I hope you're excited about this because it's really cool. And you probably won't realize it's really cool until you actually do it and you begin to actually forge that connection and realize how interesting and powerful that actually is. So anyway, become a member, helps out a lot. Check out my books, check out my podcast, Dawn of the New Earth on Spotify. Links are in the description of this video. Check out my notes. And thank you all so much. I appreciate your support. Biggest shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nucelina, Dallas, Digital Tech, David, LaDonna, Grace, Kira, Val, and everyone else. Thank you very much.